She had just survived 22 hours of labor, alone, with no hand to hold and no name called in the waiting room. And when her husband finally appeared in the doorway of her hospital room, looked at the two smallest, most perfect things she had ever made, and told her to keep her distance from his life and his name, she looked up at him from that narrow hospital bed with eyes that had just witnessed the extraordinary, and felt something in her that had been sleeping for 3 years rise, quietly, incompletely, and refused to ever lie down again. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. I am Mr. Zaha. Thanks for tuning in today. A kind words from a man who has seen it all. Marriage are not mostly bed of roses. Sometime you need more of. More of what? Can't say. Continue watching, and you will surely know what to do in situations like this. Kindly hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. So let's get started. The twins were born at 3:17 and 3:22 in the morning. A girl first, small, furious, arriving into the world with her fists already clenched, as though she had made a decision in the womb and was committed to it. Then a boy, quieter, wider-eyed, blinking at the light with the expression of someone who had heard a great deal about this place and was reserving judgment. Naomi Grace Wells. She had not changed her name at marriage, a decision that had caused exactly one argument in the first month and had not been raised again, because Cole Harrington had learned early that there were certain things Naomi said quietly that were finished before they began, lay back against the hospital pillow, and felt the particular, devastating fullness of a woman who has just done the most extraordinary thing a human body can do, alone. Not entirely alone. Rochelle had been there. Rochelle Simone Wells, Naomi's older sister by 4 years, who had driven from Brooklyn to Lenox Hill Hospital at 11:30 at night in November traffic with a hospital bag she had packed herself because Naomi hadn't let anyone help her pack, who had held Naomi's hand for 22 hours without complaint, who had cried when the girl arrived and laughed when the boy did. Rochelle had been there. Cole had not. He had been in Tokyo. This was the fact, stated plainly, without the editorial it perhaps deserved. Cole Harrington, CEO of Harrington Group, a privately held conglomerate with interests in commercial real estate, technology infrastructure, and private equity, headquartered in a glass tower on Park Avenue that was itself one of the firm's assets, had been in Tokyo when his wife went into labor at 38 weeks. His assistant, a meticulous young man named Patrick, had sent a message to Naomi's phone at 2 in the morning New York time. Mr. Harrington has been informed. He will return as soon as the Tokyo meetings conclude. He sends his best. He sends his best. Rochelle had read the message over Naomi's shoulder during a contraction and said nothing, which was more devastating than anything she could have said. Naomi had set the phone face down on the bed and focused on breathing. She was good at that. She had been good at it for 3 years, at setting things face down and focusing on what was directly in front of her, at finding the breath inside the moment that was too large to hold all at once. It was a skill she had developed long before Cole Harrington, in a childhood that had required it, and she had brought it into her marriage the way she brought everything into her marriage, completely, carefully, with the full force of who she was. The full force of who she was had been, she understood now, the precise thing her husband had never been able to handle. Naomi had grown up in Durham, North Carolina. Her father, James Wells, was a professor of African American studies at Duke University, a compact, brilliant man with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead and an ability to locate the precise historical context of any human situation, which made him extraordinary in a classroom and occasionally exhausting at dinner. Her mother, Gloria Wells, née Okafor, had been born in Enugu, Nigeria, had arrived in America at 22 with a mathematics degree and a determination that her daughter still, at 31, measured herself against. Gloria Wells had built, over 30 years, a financial advisory firm in Durham that managed portfolios for a client list that was small, carefully curated, and represented some of the most significant private wealth in the Southeast. She did not advertise. She did not need to. Her clients came by referral and stayed by results and trusted her with the specific, absolute trust that people reserve for the very few who have never once given them reason not to. Naomi had grown up watching her mother work and had absorbed, without being taught it directly, the understanding that competence is a form of love, that to do something excellently, thoroughly, without shortcuts, is to honor both the thing and the people it serves. She had carried this into everything she did. She had a master's degree in urban planning from Columbia. She had spent 4 years at a nonprofit urban development organization in Harlem, working on affordable housing initiatives, before transitioning to independent consulting. She was, by every measure that mattered, a woman of substance, intellectually serious, professionally accomplished, possessed of the kind of quiet authority that does not announce itself, but is felt immediately by everyone in any room she enters. Cole Harrington had walked into one of those rooms 3.5 years ago. It had been a fundraising dinner for an affordable housing initiative in Lower Manhattan, the kind of event that attracted a specific mixture of people, those who genuinely cared about the work, and those who cared about being seen to care, and a small, uncomfortable overlap between the two. Naomi had been there for the first reason, presenting a development proposal her organization had spent 8 months building. Cole had been there, she learned later, because his firm had been approached about a tax credit partnership, and he had come to assess the viability in person. He had not expected her. She had watched him watch her during her presentation, had clocked the attention with the peripheral awareness of a woman who has learned to register these things without reacting to them, and had filed it under not relevant and continued her presentation. Afterward, he had found her at the edge of the room with the practiced ease of a man who has never been told his approach is unwelcome. "Cole Harrington," he had said. "I know who you are," she had said, which was not what he expected, and the slight surprise of it had shifted something in his expression, a crack in the practiced surface, something genuine flickering underneath, and that flicker, she would later think, was what had undone her. She had been so good, for so long, at not being moved by things that presented themselves beautifully on the outside. But that flicker of genuine surprise on a face that clearly rarely wore it had felt, in the moment, like a window. She had looked through it. She had not, perhaps, looked long enough. They were married 14 months later in a small ceremony in Durham, her parents' backyard, the June garden outrageous with color, Gloria Wells presiding over the catering with the focused intensity she brought to all operations. Cole's family, his mother, Eleanor Harrington, arriving from Greenwich, Connecticut in a car that cost more than several of the surrounding homes, and with an expression she was too well-bred to let become openly readable, had been polite. Thoroughly, carefully, specifically polite. Naomi's father had shaken Cole's hand and looked at his daughter and said, quietly, while Cole was occupied with the champagne, "You are the best thing at this wedding, Naomi. Make sure he always knows that." She had smiled. She had not, at the time, understood what he was preparing her for. The marriage had been, in the first year, genuinely good. Cole was not a warm man. She had never expected warmth, had not needed it, had been drawn instead to the intelligence and the drive and the rare, unguarded moments when the window opened and the real person behind the CEO materialized briefly, unexpectedly, and was worth the waiting. She had believed, in year one, that she was the person who could reach that man consistently. That love, applied with patience and honesty, would gradually widen what was narrow in him. Year two had tested that belief. Year three had quietly broken it. The distance had come the way it always comes, not in one event, but in an accumulation of absences. Business trips that multiplied, dinners canceled, conversations that arrived at the surface of things and stopped there, as though depth required a permission he had decided not to grant. And underneath all of it, threaded through every absence and every surface conversation, something she felt but could not prove and had never been able to name cleanly. The sense that he was ashamed, not of her specifically, or not only that, but of the distance between her world, Durham, the nonprofit, the Wells family kitchen on a Sunday afternoon loud with aunties and opinions and food that took all day, and his. The Park Avenue Tower, the Tokyo meetings, the world that ran on a different set of rules, spoken in a different register, and looked at her, when it looked at her at all, with the specific courtesy of a world that has decided you are a guest. She had tried. God, she had tried. And then she had gotten pregnant. And for 6 weeks she had held that knowledge alone, waiting for the right moment to tell him. And when she finally had, Cole Harrington had looked at her across the dinner table in their Upper East Side apartment with an expression she had never seen before and had said, after a silence that lasted long enough to become its own answer, "Are you sure about the timing?" She had looked at him. She had said, very quietly. Yes, Cole. I'm sure about the timing. He had nodded. He had picked up his fork. And she had understood, in that moment, with the clarity of a woman who has been patient long enough to see clearly, that the window she had believed in was not a window at all. It was a wall with the light on the other side. And now it was 3:26 in the morning, and the twins were 7 minutes old, and Rochelle was holding the girl, and the nurse was settling the boy, and Naomi lay in the narrow hospital bed in the specific, bone-deep exhaustion of a woman who has just moved a mountain with her body and looked at the ceiling of a hospital room in Manhattan and thought about a man in Tokyo who had sent his best. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about her mother, Gloria Wells, who had built something extraordinary from a clear vision and an uncompromising standard and 30 years of refusing to be less than she was. She thought about what her father had said in the June garden. Make sure he always knows. She looked at her daughter in Rochelle's arms. She looked at her son in the nurse's careful hands. She felt something move in her chest. Not rage, not grief, but something older and quieter and considerably more powerful than either. She felt herself decide. Speech balloon: a woman alone in a hospital room at 3 in the morning, with 2 new lives and a husband who sent his best. If this already has you feeling something, drop a comment. We're just getting started. He arrived at 11:14 in the morning. Naomi knew the time because she had been watching the clock above the door of her hospital room with the specific, involuntary attention of a woman who has been waiting for something she is no longer sure she wants. The way you watch a storm approaching from a distance, tracking it not because you can stop it, but because your body insists on knowing exactly when it will arrive. The twins were sleeping. They had been bathed and swaddled and placed in the 2 clear hospital bassinets beside her bed, and they slept with the absolute, world-excluding completeness of new people who have not yet learned that the world requires anything from them. The girl, Naomi, had already, privately and with complete certainty, named her Josephine, after her grandmother's middle name, though she had not said this aloud to anyone yet. Slept with her chin tucked down and her fists curled, still committed. The boy, Gabriel, her father's middle name, a decision she had carried quietly for months, slept with his arms thrown wide, open to everything. She looked at them and felt the particular, overwhelming love of a woman who has just understood, at a cellular level, what she is capable of. Then she heard the footsteps in the corridor. She knew his footsteps. She had known them for 3 years. The particular rhythm of Cole Harrington in motion, purposeful and metered, the walk of a man who has never once in his adult life been uncertain about whether a room wanted him. The door opened. He was in a suit. This was the first thing she noticed, and she filed it immediately in the part of her mind that had been quietly keeping records for 3 years, the part that noticed things and did not yet know what to do with them. He had come from the airport, presumably, directly to the hospital, or perhaps he had gone to the apartment first, to shower and change, and he was in a suit. Dark gray, impeccable. His hair was airport neat. He looked, in the doorway of a maternity room at 11 in the morning, like a man arriving for a board meeting he had marginally deprioritized. He looked at her first. Then his eyes moved to the bassinets. She watched him look at his children for the first time. She had thought about this moment, had imagined it, in the strange, solitary hours of her pregnancy, with a range of outcomes from the hopeful to the heartbreaking. She had imagined him softening, had imagined the window opening, had imagined that whatever was narrow in him might, when confronted with the specific and irrefutable miracle of 2 new people who were made partly from him, crack open into something larger. She watched his face. She watched him look at the twins with an expression that was not cold. She would not call it cold, even now, even in everything that followed, but was careful, contained. The expression of a man processing information and deciding how to respond to it rather than simply responding. The window did not open. "How are you feeling?" he said. His voice was measured. He had come far enough into the room that the door swung shut behind him, but had stopped well short of her bedside. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her and shouldn't have. She had always been steady. It was the thing about her that people mistook for distance, when it was actually depth. "Good." He nodded at the bassinets. "There, they look healthy." "They are. The girl is 5 pounds 11. The boy is 6 pounds 2. She paused. They were born at 3:17 and 3:22. Something moved across his face at that. A flicker, not quite guilt, not quite grief, but in the neighborhood. There and gone. The Tokyo meetings, he started. Cole. She said it quietly, and he stopped. I'm not doing that right now. He closed his mouth. The room was very still. The boy, Gabriel, made a small sound in his sleep, a soft, involuntary exhalation that was somehow the most human sound in the room, and both of them looked at him for a moment. I need to talk to you, Cole said. I know. About the situation. She looked at him. The situation. Naomi. He moved, finally, to the chair beside the window, not her bedside. The window, maintaining the distance of a man conducting a difficult conversation rather than inhabiting one. He sat down and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and she recognized the posture. She had seen it in the photographs that ran in business profiles of him. The posture of a man delivering news he has decided in advance, presenting it with the body language of consideration while the decision itself is already fixed. I've been thinking, he said, for a while now. About us. About the direction of things. The direction of things, she repeated. We haven't been working. He said it the way he said things in board meetings, plainly, without softening, under the apparent impression that plainness was the same as honesty. I think we both know that. And now with them, he gestured toward the bassinets, a gesture that was meant to be decisive and landed as something closer to dismissive, and Naomi felt her chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the aftermath of labor. I think it's better for everyone if we're clear about where things stand. She waited. She had learned, in 3 years of marriage, in a childhood that required it, in the accumulated experience of a black woman moving through spaces that were not designed for her presence, the specific power of waiting, of not filling silence with the anxious words that silence seems to demand. She waited, and the silence sat between them, and Cole Harrington, who was uncomfortable with silence in the way that powerful men often are, filled it. I think you should move out of the apartment, he said. Take some time. Figure out a situation that works. I'll have Patrick reach out to your attorney about financial arrangements. I want to be fair about that. He paused. But I think it's important that we keep our distance from each other. While this gets sorted out, the last 3 words landed in the room and stayed there. Keep our distance. Naomi looked at her husband across the hospital room, across the bassinets where their 7-hour-old children slept with their fists curled and their arms wide, and she felt the full inventory of what those words meant. Not just the marriage, not just the apartment. Keep our distance from each other. While this gets sorted out, as though the twins were a scheduling conflict, as though she was a liability to be managed at arm's length while the paperwork caught up. I want to make sure you're taken care of, he said, which was the specific thing a man says when he has decided he is done taking care of you and wants credit for the intention. Cole, she said, I know the timing is. Cole. Again, quiet. He stopped. She looked at him with the clear, still eyes of a woman who has just given birth alone and has not slept, and is in the specific, unassailable position of someone who has nothing left to lose and has therefore become, without fanfare, completely free. I need you to understand something. Naomi, I need you to look at me, she said. Not at the window, not at the door, at me. He looked at her. I have just spent 22 hours in labor, she said, her voice unhurried and precise, each word placed with the care of a woman who has earned the right to take her time. Alone, I have brought 2 people into the world. Your children, whether that is a fact you are currently comfortable with or not, are sleeping 7 feet from where you are sitting. And you have come here, in your suit, from your flight, to tell me to keep my distance. He opened his mouth. I'm not finished, she said. He closed it. I am going to give you the grace of not responding to that the way it deserves, she said. Because I am tired, and because there are 2 new people in this room who do not need the first sounds they hear in this world to be their parents doing damage to each other. She held his eyes. But I need you to hear me clearly, Cole. Whatever you think this is, whatever you have decided about me, about us, about what I am to you, and what I am worth, you do not know the full picture. You have never known the full picture. And the decisions you are making right now, in this room, are being made on information that is so incomplete that when you finally have all of it, she paused. Let the pause sit. You are going to wish you had made different ones. The room was absolutely silent. Cole stared at her. In the bassinets, the twins slept on, Josephine with her fists curled, Gabriel with his arms wide, indifferent to the size of the moment, or perhaps simply trusting it. The way new people trust that the world, having made them, intends to make good on the promise. I don't know what that means, Cole said finally. I know you don't, Naomi said. She settled back against the pillow. She closed her eyes. You can go now, Cole, she said. Patrick can reach my attorney on Monday. Her name is Beverly Okafor, and she is excellent at her job. She heard him stand. She heard the particular, recalibrated quality of his footsteps moving to the door, different from the footsteps that had arrived. The steps of a man who has entered a room expecting to control it and is leaving it with the uncomfortable sensation of having been, in some way he cannot yet identify, outmaneuvered. The door opened. Naomi. Monday, she said, without opening her eyes. Beverly Okafor. Have Patrick call. A pause. The door closed. She opened her eyes. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, feeling the full weight of everything that had just happened settle across her chest. Then she turned her head and looked at the bassinets. Josephine. Gabriel. Good morning, she said softly. I'm your mother, and I need you to know, before anything else in this world gets to tell you anything, that you are wanted. You are seen, and there is not a single thing in this life that the two of you cannot do. Josephine's fist tightened in her sleep. Gabriel's arms stayed wide. Naomi smiled, tired and clear-eyed and unbroken, and reached for her phone. She found Beverly Okafor's name. This time she called. Speech balloon, you are wanted. You are seen. If those words hit you somewhere deep, drop a comment below. Tell me what you felt in that hospital room. Beverly Okafor's office was on Auburn Avenue, 3 blocks from Ebenezer Baptist Church, in a narrow Victorian townhouse that had been in continuous professional use since 1943. The building wore its history the way certain black institutions in Atlanta wear theirs, without apology, without explanation, with the quiet, load-bearing dignity of something that has survived by being absolutely necessary to the people it served. The brass nameplate beside the door read simply, Okafor Legal and Trust Services. No tagline, no list of specialties. Beverly had always said that if you needed to be told what she did, you probably weren't her client. Naomi had been her client since the reading of her grandmother's will. She arrived on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after leaving the hospital, 11 days of her mother's house in a suburb of Atlanta, where Gloria Wells had installed her daughter and grandchildren with the focused, non-negotiable efficiency of a woman who understands that recovery requires infrastructure. The twins were with Gloria now, and Rochelle, and an aunt named Cecile who had appeared from Charlotte the day after the birth and announced she was staying for 2 weeks and had, in fact, shown no signs of leaving. The Wells family, when it mobilized, was not a modest operation. Naomi walked into Beverly's office carrying a leather tote, 6 hours of sleep, and the particular clarity of a woman who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. Beverly was at her desk. She was 63, small and precise, with natural silver locks pinned back and reading glasses on a beaded chain that had been a gift from Naomi's grandmother. She looked up when Naomi came in and did the thing she always did, a quick, comprehensive, unobtrusive assessment, the kind that takes less than 3 seconds and misses nothing. Whatever she found satisfied her, because she stood up and came around the desk and held Naomi's face in both hands for a moment, the way older women do when words aren't the right instrument. Sit down, she said then. We have a great deal to discuss. The file was substantial. Beverly had prepared it with the thoroughness that had characterized every interaction Naomi had ever had with her, organized into sections, tabbed, accompanied by a summary document that laid out the architecture of the Carter family trust in language that was precise without being cold, comprehensive without being overwhelming. She had clearly been waiting for this meeting for 3 years, with the patience of a woman who understood that readiness cannot be rushed and had therefore simply kept the file current and the coffee fresh. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Beverly said, setting the summary document in front of Naomi. She was also remarkably specific. Everything she built with you in mind. Not abstractly, specifically. She restructured the trust 14 months before she died, after you got married, and the restructuring was deliberate. Naomi looked at the summary document. She wanted you to have it whole, Beverly continued. Not parceled, not co-managed, not subject to any external claim. She spoke to me about it directly. She said. Beverly paused, and something crossed her face that was not quite a smile, but was in the territory. She said, "Beverly, my granddaughter is going to need to know that what is hers is entirely hers. Make sure there is no ambiguity about that." Naomi sat with that for a moment. Her grandmother, Josephine Adiz Carter, who had arrived in Atlanta in 1962 with nothing visible and everything that counted, who had built an empire from clarity and refusal and the strategic deployment of a mind several people had underestimated to their permanent regret, who had looked at her granddaughter's marriage from a careful distance and had, without ever saying a word about what she saw, without ever once undermining Naomi's choice, quietly, methodically, made sure that whatever happened, Naomi would be standing on ground that was entirely her own. "Show me everything," Naomi said. Beverly opened the file. The Carter Family Trust held, as of the most recent valuation, 47 commercial properties across Atlanta, Birmingham, and Charlotte. The property management company, Carter Property Group, 312 units under management, a staff of 21, profitable for 19 consecutive years. The Peachtree Street Tower, 12 stories, fully tenanted, the anchor of the portfolio, and the building that had made people call Josephine Carter foolish in 1987 and had been making them regret it ever since. A diversified investment portfolio managed by Gloria Wells's firm, which had compounded quietly and aggressively for 30 years. Several additional holdings, a stake in a Durham commercial development, a small but valuable piece of land in Buckhead, Atlanta, that had been sitting in the trust for 20 years appreciating with the patience of something that knows its own worth and is in no hurry. And at the center of it, the number. Beverly said it plainly, the way she said everything, without performance. Naomi looked at the page. She did not look away from it. She sat with it the way she had sat with hard things her whole life, directly, without flinching, giving it the full weight of her attention until it became something she had absorbed rather than something that was happening to her. "The Buckhead property," she said, after a moment. "Yes," Beverly said. "That's..." She looked at the address on the page and felt something move in her chest. "That's 3 blocks from the house." "Yes," Beverly said again, with the specific composure of a woman who has known this detail for some time and has been waiting for Naomi to arrive at it. 3 blocks from the house in Buckhead, where Naomi had spent 3 years making a life in a space that had never felt entirely like hers. 3 blocks from the house, where she had chosen the kitchen hardware and found the oak dining table and planted the garden. 3 blocks away, sitting in the Carter Family Trust for 20 years, was a piece of land that her grandmother had purchased in 1983, before the neighborhood became what it was, before the values multiplied, before anyone who wasn't Josephine Carter could see what it would become. 3 blocks away. All along. "Beverly," Naomi said. "Yes." "He doesn't know any of this." "No." "His attorney, whatever firm Cole is using, they would have run a background financial check before the marriage. Standard practice." "They would have," Beverly agreed. "And they would have found Naomi Grace Wells, Columbia degree, nonprofit employment, consulting income, clean credit, no significant assets in her personal name." She paused. "Because your grandmother put nothing in your personal name. Everything is in the trust. And the trust is structured in a way that requires specific knowledge to find and specific expertise to value." Naomi looked at her. "He married a woman he thought had nothing," she said. It was not a question. It was the sound of a picture coming into focus. "He married a woman he didn't investigate thoroughly enough," Beverly said, with the measured precision of someone who has opinions about this but has chosen the professional register, which is not the same thing. But the practical result is similar. Naomi drove back to her mother's house in the early afternoon, through Atlanta streets she had known her whole life, past the neighborhoods her grandmother had built and the buildings her grandmother had bought and the city that had, in 1,000 visible and invisible ways, been shaped partly by the quiet, extraordinary work of the women in her family. She thought about Cole. She thought about him in his suit at the hospital, about keep your distance and Patrick will reach out and the window that was a wall. She thought about the specific quality of his dismissal, not vicious, not intentional in the way of a man who knows the damage he is doing, but careless, which was in some ways worse. The carelessness of a man who had never once, in 3 years of marriage, thought to ask who he was sleeping next to. She thought about her grandmother. Make sure there is no ambiguity about that. She thought about Josephine in the bassinet with her fists curled, and Gabriel with his arms thrown wide. and the 11 days she had spent in her mother's house being held by the women of her family while she recovered and planned and remembered who she was. She was not angry. This surprised her when she checked. She had expected anger, had prepared for it, had made space for it. But what she found instead, sitting in the honest interior of herself on that Tuesday afternoon drive, was something quieter and more durable than anger. She was ready. Her mother was in the kitchen when she got back. Gloria Wells, 61 years old, reading glasses on her nose and a financial report open on the counter, was simultaneously feeding Gabriel with the practiced ease of a woman for whom competence is a natural state and making notes in the margin of a page with her free hand. She looked up when Naomi came through the door. She read her daughter's face with the rapid, complete fluency of a woman who has been reading it for 31 years. "Beverly," she said. "Beverly," Naomi confirmed. Gloria looked at her for a moment. "And?" Naomi set her leather toad on the counter. She reached over and put her finger in Gabriel's hand and felt his fingers curl around it. That reflex, that instinctive grip, the trust of something new that doesn't know yet how to be afraid. "I need to make some calls," Naomi said. Gloria Wells took off her reading glasses. She looked at her daughter, at Naomi Grace Wells, 31 years old, Josephine's granddaughter and Marcus's daughter and her own, who had spent 3 years being smaller than she was and 11 days remembering her size, and was standing now in her mother's kitchen with the clear, undeflectable expression of a woman who has located her own foundation and is done building on anything else. She smiled. Not the smile of a woman surprised. The smile of a woman who has been waiting. "Use the study," Gloria said. "I'll keep the babies." The first call was to Beverly. The second was to a real estate attorney named Marcus Holt who had handled trust transactions for the Carter family for 15 years and answered on the first ring when he saw the name. The third call, the one she sat with for a moment before dialing, the one that required a specific quality of breath before it began, was to her father. James Wells picked up in 2 rings. "Simone," he said, his name for her, the private one, the one that had lived inside their family for 31 years and had never appeared on any document. "Daddy," she said. And then, for the first time since the hospital, since the suit in the window and the words that had been meant to diminish her, Naomi Grace Wells, granddaughter of Josephine, daughter of Gloria and James, mother of Josephine and Gabriel, the woman in the Carter family trust who had been sitting quietly in the background of her own extraordinary story for 3 years, put her head back against her mother's study chair and cried. Not from grief, not from defeat, from the specific, enormous relief of a woman who has been holding herself together across an impossible distance and has finally arrived somewhere safe enough to put it down. Her father said nothing. He stayed on the line. He had always known, as the best fathers do, that some things don't need to be fixed, only witnessed. "I'm okay," she said after a while. "I know you are," he said. "I'm going to be better than okay." "Naomi." His voice was warm and certain, the voice of a man who has never once doubted his daughter's capacity. "I know that too." Outside, Atlanta moved through its afternoon, restless and magnificent and full of the history of people who had built extraordinary things from difficult materials. And inside her mother's study, Naomi Grace Wells wiped her eyes, straightened in the chair, and picked up her pen. She had calls to make. She had a file to open. She had a life to build. Not recover, not reclaim, but build, from the ground up, on foundations that were entirely and unambiguously hers. And she was, at last, completely ready to begin. Not from grief, not from defeat, from relief. Have you ever cried like that? The kind of cry that means you're finally safe? Tell me in the comments. This story sees you. Cole Harrington found out on a Thursday. Not from Naomi. Not from Beverly Okafor, whose name he had passed to Patrick with the brisk efficiency of a man outsourcing an inconvenience. Not from any of the careful, deliberate channels through which Naomi had been moving for the past 3 weeks with the focused, unhurried intention of a woman who understands that the most powerful moves are the ones that don't announce themselves. He found out the way men like Cole Harrington find out things they should have known all along, from someone else, in a room he thought he controlled, at a moment designed by no one, but landing with the precision of something that was always, inevitably, coming. It was a Thursday morning partners meeting at Greystone Capital. The meeting had been on the calendar for 6 weeks. It was a quarterly portfolio review, the kind of meeting that filled the large glass conference room on the 28th floor of the Greystone Tower with the senior partners and their department heads, and the particular atmosphere of people who manage significant money gathering to confirm that the significant money is performing significantly. Cole ran these meetings with the competent, unhurried authority of a man in complete command of his environment, moving through agenda items with the rhythm of someone who has done this long enough that it has become a form of fluency. He was on the fourth agenda item when his phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. He glanced down. His assistant Patrick, who knew better than to interrupt a partner's meeting with anything less than a structural emergency, had sent 3 messages in 90 seconds. Cole held up a hand to pause the presentation on the screen and looked at his phone. The first message said, "The Carter Trust attorneys have filed." The second said, "You need to see the asset summary now." The third said, "Cole, please call me." He excused himself from the meeting with the controlled composure of a man who has trained himself never to let his face do anything his brain hasn't approved first. He walked to his office, closed the door, and called Patrick. Patrick answered immediately. "Talk to me," Cole said. What Patrick said next took 4 minutes. Cole stood at his office window, 28 floors above Midtown Atlanta, the city spreading in every direction, the autumn sky flat and bright above it, and listened to his assistant describe, in the careful, slightly stunned tones of a man who has just read something that rearranged his understanding of a situation he thought he had fully mapped, the contents of the Carter Family Trust asset summary that Beverly Okafor's office had formally filed as part of the divorce proceedings. The properties, the management company, the Peachtree Street Tower, the investment portfolio, the Buckhead land, the number. Cole said nothing for a long time after Patrick finished. "Cole," Patrick said. "I'll call you back," Cole said. He put the phone down. He stood at the window. Below him, Atlanta moved through its Thursday with complete indifference to the fact that Cole Harrington was standing 28 floors above it, having the specific, disorienting experience of a man who has been playing a game he was certain he understood and has just been shown, with quiet and irrefutable clarity, that he was playing it on the wrong board entirely. He called his attorney first. Richard Graves, senior partner, Graves & Associates, the firm that handled all of Greystone Capital's legal work and, by extension, Cole's personal matters, answered with the measured calm of a man who had already been briefed. "Richard," Cole said. "The Carter Trust." "I've seen it," Richard said. "Why didn't we know about this?" A pause. The specific pause of an attorney choosing his words with the care that a situation requires. The trust was structured in a way that kept it entirely separate from Mrs. Harrington's personal financial profile. There was nothing in her personal name that would have flagged it in a standard background review. The trust itself, another pause. It was not hidden. It simply wasn't visible from the angle we were looking. How is that possible? "Cole." Richard's voice carried the measured directness of a man delivering a diagnosis. The trust was established by Josephine Carter in 1971 and restructured in 2021. The attorneys who built it knew exactly what they were doing. It was structured to be found by someone who knew to look for it. "We didn't know to look for it because," he stopped. "Because I didn't tell you to," Cole said. Silence. "Because I didn't know to tell you to," Cole said, quieter. "The asset summary Beverly Okafor filed," Richard said carefully, "represents one of the most significant private real estate and trust portfolios in the Southeast. And under the terms of the trust restructuring your wife's grandmother completed in 2021, it is entirely and unambiguously Naomi's. There is no marital property claim on any of it. It predates the marriage. It is trust-held. It is," he paused once more. "It is hers. Completely." Cole stood at the window. "She knew this," he said. "The whole time." Richard said nothing. 3 years, Cole said. Not to Richard. Not really to anyone. 3 years she was. She never said anything. "Cole," Richard said, with the particular gentleness of a man delivering something sharp. "I think the more pressing question isn't what she didn't say. It's what you did." He left the office at noon. He drove. Himself. No driver, which he almost never did. But he needed the specific solitude of a car moving through a city, the particular thinking space of motion without destination. He drove through Midtown, through the streets he had known for 12 years since relocating from New York to build Greystone's Atlanta operation, through a city he had always understood as a place of business, of deals and growth and strategic positioning. And he drove, and he thought. He thought about the hospital room. He thought about Naomi in the narrow bed, in the specific, unassailable exhaustion of a woman who had just done something extraordinary, looking at him with those clear, still eyes that had never once, in 3 years, looked at him with anything less than the full force of her attention, which he had received and not matched and not deserved. He thought about keep your distance. He thought about the suit he had worn to the hospital. He thought about Patrick reaching out to her attorney. He thought about 11 months ago, when she had told him she was pregnant, and he had sat across from her at the dinner table. Their dining table, the wide plank oak table she had found at an estate sale in Savannah, that he had accepted compliments about at dinner parties without once mentioning who had found it, and said, "Are you sure about the timing?" He pulled over. He sat in the parked car on a street in Buckhead, 3 blocks, though he didn't know it yet, from a piece of land in the Carter family trust that had been sitting there for 20 years, and he put his hands on the wheel, and he sat with the full, unmanaged weight of what he had done. Not the financial miscalculation, not the professional embarrassment of having missed something his due diligence should have caught, not the legal situation that Richard Graves was now navigating with the careful hands of a man defusing something delicate. What he had done to her. He had married a woman of extraordinary depth and quiet power, and had spent 3 years seeing only the surface of her, had taken the warmth and the competence and the grace she offered and absorbed them into his life like utilities, like things that existed for his comfort and ran in the background and required no acknowledgement. He had let her be invisible in a life she had made beautiful. He had taken her to his work functions and received the social credit of a well-chosen wife, and had never once, at those functions, stood beside her and made sure the room knew who it was actually dealing with. He had gone to Tokyo. He had sent his best. He had walked into her hospital room in his suit and told her to keep her distance, and had not. In the suit, with the briefcase, in the full armor of the identity he had built and polished and lived inside so completely that he had forgotten it was a construction, had not once looked at the woman in the narrow bed and understood what he was looking at. He sat in the parked car for a long time. He called her at 2 in the afternoon. He did not know what he expected. He half expected her not to answer, would have understood it, could not have argued with it. But she answered on the 3rd ring, and her voice was what it always was, clear, unhurried, carrying that quality he had always registered without naming, the quality of someone who is completely present in every moment because they have learned that presence is both a discipline and a form of power. "Cole," she said. "Naomi." He stopped. He had rehearsed this, had sat in the parked car constructing sentences with the verbal precision he brought to board presentations, had assembled what he intended to say into something organized and clear. None of it was available to him now. Beverly's filing. I saw the summary. "I know," she said. "I didn't know," he said. "About the trust. About any of it. I know you didn't. That's not. I need you to know that's not why I'm calling." He pressed on, through the inadequacy of the words, because the alternative was silence, and silence was no longer something he was willing to hide inside. "I'm not calling about the money, Naomi. I'm calling because I sat in my car for 2 hours thinking about the hospital room. About what I said to you. About what I did." He stopped. "About what I have been doing for 3 years." The line was quiet. "I am so sorry," he said. And then, because sorry was insufficient and he knew it and needed her to know that he knew it. "I don't mean that as a transaction. I'm not offering an apology as a legal strategy. I mean it as the plain truth of a man who has been standing in front of something extraordinary for 3 years and calling it ordinary, and I am." His voice caught. He had not expected that. He had not, in 41 years of a life conducted with considerable emotional control, expected his voice to catch in a parked car on a street in Buckhead while talking to his wife. "I am ashamed of myself, Naomi." The silence on the line was different now. Not cold, not closed. Listening. "You said something to me in the hospital," he said. "You said I was making decisions on incomplete information, that when I had all of it, I would wish I had made different ones." He paused. "You were right. And it wasn't the trust. It was you. I didn't have all of you. I had the version you could fit into the space I gave you. And I gave you almost nothing to work with, and you made it." He stopped. "You made it beautiful anyway. Because that's what you do. Because that's who you are. And I was too. I was too small, in the ways that matter, to deserve it. Another silence. Then Naomi's voice, careful and real. Cole, where are you? He looked at the street around him. Buckhead, he said. I just drove. I pulled over. Are you all right? The question landed on him with the specific impact of an unexpected kindness, the particular force that grace has when it comes from someone who has no obligation to offer it. He had told this woman to keep her distance. She was asking if he was all right. No, he said honestly. I don't think I am. A long pause. The twins are here, she said finally. And my mother's. There, and something shifted in her voice, something that was not forgiveness yet, but was in the direction of it, was in the same territory, was at least in the same city. Cole, they're beautiful. They're so, she stopped. He heard her breathe. Josephine has your jaw. Did you know that? I noticed it in the hospital, and I didn't. I didn't say anything, but she has your jaw, and she's so beautiful. He closed his eyes. Josephine. She had named their daughter Josephine. He stopped. He tried again. Is there any? Naomi, I am not asking for anything you don't want to give. I am not asking you to make a decision today. But is there any chance that I could? He could not finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Gloria's house, she said quietly. Saturday, 10 o'clock. You come as a father, Cole. Not as a CEO. Not with Patrick. Not in the suit. A pause, her voice precise and clear. You come as the man who needs to meet his children. And we take it from there. One thing at a time. He breathed. One thing at a time, he said. And Cole. Yes. Don't be late. Josephine has your jaw. I need to know. Did that line break you a little? Drop a comment. Tell me where you are right now. He was early. Not in the performative way of a man trying to make a point. Not the calculated early of someone managing an impression, but genuinely, quietly early. Sitting in a parked car on a residential street in southwest Atlanta at 9:20 in the morning because he had left his hotel at 8:45 and driven here with none of the deliberate delay of a man who has somewhere more important to be. Because there was nowhere more important to be, and he had known it with a certainty that was new to him and felt, in its newness, like the first honest thing he had known in a very long time. He had not worn the suit. Dark jeans. A simple gray sweater. The kind of clothes a person wears when they have decided, consciously and with effort, to show up as themselves rather than as the version of themselves that has learned to use appearance as a form of argument. He had stood in his hotel room that morning and looked at the rack of suits he had brought from the apartment that was not, had never been, as fully his as he had understood it to be, and he had put on jeans and a gray sweater, and he had felt, in the mirror, like a man he was only beginning to recognize. He sat in the parked car and looked at the house. Gloria Wells's house was a wide craftsman bungalow on a tree-lined street that had the particular quality of a neighborhood that has been loved consistently and well for a long time. The porch was deep and furnished. 2 wooden rocking chairs, a hanging fern, a small table with a coffee mug on it that suggested someone had been sitting there recently. The garden was November bare but had the organized structure of something that would be extraordinary in spring, the careful bones of a planting done with knowledge and intention. A child's drawing, laminated against the weather, was taped to the inside of one of the front windows. It was not the house Cole had grown up in. He had grown up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a house that was large and cold and managed by a housekeeper named Mrs. Britton, who communicated affection through the reliable presence of clean surfaces. His mother, Eleanor Harrington, was a woman of immense social competence and considerable emotional distance, who had raised him to understand that excellence was the primary language of love and that warmth, while pleasant, was not load-bearing. He had absorbed this. He had built a life on it. He was beginning to understand what it had cost. At 9:58 he got out of the car. He walked up the path to the front porch and stood at the door for a moment before knocking. Stood there in the November morning with his hands at his sides and the sound of the neighborhood around him, a dog somewhere, a car passing, the distant percussion of someone's Saturday yard work, the ordinary music of a life being lived. And he took a breath that was not a preparation for performance, but simply a breath. The breath of a man trying to be present in a moment rather than managing it. He knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Not Naomi, but an older woman he recognized from the wedding, from the June garden in Durham, from the single photograph in the apartment that Naomi kept on her desk in the small room she called her office, and he had never once sat in. Gloria Wells stood in the doorway in a house cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and looked at him with the unhurried, comprehensive attention of a woman who has been a financial advisor for 30 years and has made a practice of reading the thing beneath the presented thing. She did not smile. She did not frown. She looked at him for a moment with those gray-green eyes. Naomi's eyes, he realized, the same eyes. And then she stepped back from the door. "Come in," she said. The house was warm. This was the first thing he felt. Not temperature, though it was that too, but the specific warmth of a house that has been inhabited with love for a long time, that carries in its walls and its furniture and it smells the accumulated evidence of a family that has used this space to hold each other. It smelled like coffee and something baking and, faintly, like the specific clean sweetness of new babies. The walls were covered in photographs, not the curated, gallery-hung photographs of a decorator's vision, but the real kind, the overlapping, chronological, slightly crooked kind that document an actual life. Naomi at every age. A woman he recognized as Josephine Carter in a photograph from what looked like the 70s, standing in front of a building in Atlanta with the expression of a woman who has just purchased something everyone told her was foolish. James Wells in a graduation photograph, then a wedding photograph, then 100 ordinary moments that had been deemed worth keeping. A family. He stood in the hallway of Gloria Wells's house and understood, with the specific comprehension of a man who has spent 41 years in rooms that were designed to impress rather than to hold, what a home actually was. "She's in the back," Gloria said. She had not offered him coffee. He had not expected her to. He understood that this morning had a structure that was not his to set. "Cole." He turned. She was looking at him with the full, undeflected attention of a mother who has watched her daughter be hurt and has made a decision about how to proceed that is neither vindictive nor naive. "My daughter," Gloria said, "is one of the finest people I have ever known, and I have known some extraordinary people." She held his eyes. "She is going to be magnificent, with or without you. I need you to understand that before you walk through that door, not as a threat, as a fact. She does not need you, Cole. If she gives you another chance, it is a gift. Treat it accordingly." He held her gaze. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Something shifted very slightly in Gloria Wells's face. She stepped aside. He walked through to the back of the house. Naomi was in the sunroom. It was a wide, glass-walled room at the back of the house that looked out onto the November garden, filled with the flat, clean light of a late autumn morning. She was in an armchair, and she was holding both twins, one in each arm, with the practiced ease of a woman who has spent 4 weeks learning the specific physics of managing 2 new people simultaneously. And she was looking out at the garden, and she did not hear him come in. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at his wife, the woman he had married and diminished and dismissed and told to keep her distance, who was sitting in her mother's sunroom in the November light, holding their children with the complete, unself-conscious grace of a woman entirely inhabiting her own life. And he felt something move through him that he did not have a practiced word for, because he had spent 41 years not making room for it. It felt like grief and gratitude arriving at the same moment. It felt like understanding something too late and being given, inexplicably and undeservedly, the chance to understand it again in time. Naomi turned. She found him in the doorway and looked at him with those clear, still eyes, and did not speak immediately. Gave him the moment, the full weight of it, the way she gave everything her full weight, completely and without flinching. Then she said quietly, "Come meet your children." He crossed the room. He sat on the ottoman in front of her chair, close, but not presumptuous, at the specific distance of a man who has been told where the door is and is careful about it. And he looked at the twins. Josephine first. She was awake, dark eyes wide and present, her small face arranged in the expression of someone taking careful inventory of her surroundings. She had Naomi's forehead and her grandmother's name, and Cole saw now. Yes, the jaw. His jaw, miniaturized and made extraordinary, on the face of this small, serious, brand-new person who had absolutely no idea that she was already, in 4 weeks of life, the most important thing he had ever been near. "Hi," he said. His voice came out rough. He did not try to fix it. Josephine looked at him. Then she did something that he would describe, later, inadequately, to Richard Graves and Patrick and his mother Eleanor and anyone who would listen. She looked at him with those wide dark eyes, and she grabbed his finger. Not with the reflex grip of a sleeping newborn. She was awake. She looked at him and she reached and she grabbed his finger with the full, determined force of a small person who has decided. He could not speak for a moment. And this, Naomi said, her voice soft, is Gabriel. He looked at his son. Gabriel was looking at the ceiling with the wide, open expression of a person for whom everything is interesting and nothing is threatening. His arms characteristically thrown wide. His whole small body arranged in the posture of someone who has decided to trust the world and is waiting for the world to make good on that trust. Cole looked at Gabriel for a long moment. Then he looked at Naomi. She was watching him with the expression he had spent 3 years failing to read. The expression that was not cool or distant, but was simply deep. The expression of a woman whose interior life was so rich and substantial that its surface was necessarily still, the way deep water is still, and which he had mistaken, catastrophically, for absence rather than depth. Naomi, he said. Cole. Let me say it, he said. Please. Let me say it once, completely, and then you can do whatever you decide. But let me say it. She was quiet. He looked at her, at his wife, at this woman who had built a life of grace and substance, and was Josephine's granddaughter and Gloria's daughter, and the mother of his children, and the person who had found the dining table and planted the garden and named their daughter after her own grandmother without telling him, because he had not created a space in which she could. And he said, I did not see you. I looked at you every day for 3 years, and I did not see you. Not because you were hidden. You were never hidden, Naomi. You were right there. You were completely yourself right in front of me every single day. Because I was not looking. Because I had decided what you were before I ever really found out. And I fit you into that decision, and I called it marriage, and I was wrong. He stopped. He held Josephine's gaze, his daughter's hand still curled around his finger, still decided. I was wrong about you. I was wrong about what you needed. I was wrong about what this was supposed to be. And I know that sorry doesn't. I know it doesn't cover what that cost you. But I am sorry. Completely. Without agenda. Without strategy. I am just sorry, Naomi. The sunroom was very quiet. Gabriel made a soft sound. Josephine held on. Naomi looked at her husband for a long time. Long enough to read everything she needed to read, to find the thing beneath the presented thing, the way her mother had taught her and her grandmother had modeled, and 31 years of being a Wells woman had given her the equipment to do. She looked for the calculation. She looked for the angle. She looked for the man she had spent 3 years watching operate from behind the glass of his own constructed identity. She found, instead, a man sitting on an ottoman in her mother's sunroom in a gray sweater with his daughter's hand around his finger, looking at her with the stripped, unarmored expression of someone who has taken off every piece of protection he owns and is sitting in the cold of his own honesty for possibly the first time. It was not enough on its own. She knew that. She was not naive, had never been, the kind of woman who allowed a single honest moment to rewrite a 3-year record. There was work ahead. Real work, the hard and daily and unglamorous work of 2 people rebuilding something that had been damaged by neglect, which is in some ways more difficult than rebuilding something damaged by a single event, because neglect doesn't have a clear date, doesn't have an obvious before and after, requires excavating things that were allowed to accumulate slowly over years of small surrenders. She knew all of this. She also knew what she had seen in his face. And she knew, in the way her grandmother had known, that a building on Peachtree Street in 1987 was worth more than anyone around her could see yet. In the way her mother had known that a mathematics degree from Enugu could build something extraordinary in Durham. In the way the Wells women had always known things that required patience and vision to see. She knew that what was sitting across from her was not a finished thing. It was a beginning. Rough and insufficient and honest in the way that beginnings are. You should know, she said, carefully, that I am not the woman you married. I mean, I am. But I'm not only that. I'm done being only that. She held his eyes. I am taking the directorship. I'm running the Carter Trust. I'm building something real and significant and mine. And whoever stands next to me while I do that. She paused, and he heard, in the pause, the echo of words she had said once before in a different city in a different story that was actually the same story. Whoever stands next to me needs to be standing with me. Not managing me. Not defining me. With me. That is the only version of this that exists going forward. Yes, he said. Simply. Completely. I need you to understand what that means. I'm learning, he said. I want to learn. I know I'm starting from a long way behind. I know I don't get credit for showing up now. But I'm here, Naomi. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me to. She looked at him for one more long moment. Then she looked down at Josephine, who was still holding his finger with the absolute, non-negotiable grip of a small person who has made a decision, and she smiled. And it was the first real smile he had seen from her in longer than he could honestly account for, which told him something important about how long things had been wrong. Okay, she said. He exhaled. Okay, she said again, softer. We start here. Today. This morning. She looked up at him. But Cole, the first thing you are going to do, before anything else, is hold your son. Because Gabriel has been waiting very patiently, and he has his arms wide open, and that is, her voice caught slightly. She recovered. That is the most him thing you will ever see, and you need to be the one he reaches for. Cole looked at Gabriel. Gabriel was looking at the ceiling, arms wide, trusting everything. Cole reached over with his free hand, the one Josephine hadn't claimed, and slid it gently beneath Gabriel's small, warm weight, and lifted his son for the first time. Gabriel turned his head, found his father's face, looked at it with those wide, open, completely trusting eyes. And then, in the way of a person who has decided the world is worth opening toward, he smiled. 4 months later, on a Wednesday morning in March, Naomi Grace Wells, she had kept her name, and Cole had stopped flinching at it and started, gradually, to understand it, sat at a long conference table in Beverly Okafor's office on Auburn Avenue, and signed the documents that formally made her the managing director of the Carter Family Trust. Beverly was there. Her mother was there. Her father, James Wells, sat beside her with his reading glasses and his particular quiet pride, and when she signed the last document, he put his hand over hers exactly the way fathers do when they have been waiting a very long time for a moment and are trying to hold it without crushing it. Cole was there too. He sat at the far end of the table, not at her side yet, not in the position of a man who has reclaimed a proximity he hasn't finished earning, but present, in a gray sweater, not a suit. Watching his wife sign her name to the life her grandmother had built for her with the expression of a man learning, slowly and genuinely, what it looks like when you finally let someone be exactly who they are. After it was done, Beverly Okafor set down her pen. She looked at Naomi across the table, at the woman who had been coming to this office since her grandmother first brought her at 12 years old, who carried Josephine Carter's middle name and her own extraordinary future, and she said, with the warmth of 20 years, "Your grandmother would have been so proud." Naomi looked at the signed document. She thought about Josephine Carter arriving in Atlanta in 1962 with nothing visible and everything that counted. She thought about her mother building something extraordinary from clarity and refusal. She thought about a hospital room at 3 in the morning and 2 small people who had arrived in the world with their fists curled and their arms wide, already showing her who they were going to be. She thought about a man in a gray sweater at the end of the table who was learning, imperfectly and genuinely, that love is not a frame you fit someone into, but a space you make large enough for the whole of who they are. She thought about her grandmother's name on the document in front of her, and her own name beside it, and the long, unbroken line of women who had built things the world called impossible and called it Tuesday. She knew, Naomi said. She always knew. She looked up. She found Cole at the end of the table. He was looking at her, really looking, the way she had asked him to, the way she had been teaching him, the way he was learning with the late and earnest effort of a man who understands that he is working against years of his own construction, but is doing it anyway, because the alternative is losing something he is only now fully able to see. She held his gaze. He held hers. And in the building on Auburn Avenue, 3 blocks from Ebenezer Baptist Church, in the office of Beverly Okafor, in the city that had been shaped partly by the quiet and extraordinary work of the Carter women, Naomi Grace Wells picked up her copy of the signed document, folded it once, and placed it in her leather tote. She stood up. She was, at last, completely and entirely herself. And it was, without question, exactly enough. She was, at last, completely and entirely herself. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own mother, your grandmother, your own quiet strength, I need you to drop a comment right now. Tell me which moment stayed with you. Tell me whose face came to mind. This story was written for every woman who carried something powerful quietly, who was told to keep her distance, who was underestimated by someone who should have known better, and who rose anyway. You were never small. Not for a single day. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.